Welcome to Aviation Careers Podcast. In our last episode, we talked about the 10 reasons you should become an air traffic controller, and we had on George Harper. And George Harper is actually going to join us today to talk about the 10 reasons you should not become an air traffic controller. If you have somebody that's interested in becoming an air traffic controller, please listen to that last episode and also listen to this episode and forward this on to them because it's been extremely helpful. And George has been on our show a couple of times and has done some great stuff out there to help people understand what it's like to be an air traffic controller. Hey, George, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Carl. Nice to be back.
Yeah, this is an awesome thing that you're doing for your community and for the air traffic controllers in general. And I love the fact that you answer questions. And by the way, if you have a question, feedback at aviationcareerspodcast.com, and we send them over to George. George has helped out so many of our listeners in the past, and we do appreciate what he's done and also for his service. But George, let's get right into it. The 10 reasons you should not become an air traffic controller. And what we're going to do is I'm going to mention them, and George is going to give us a little bit of color on them. And this is number one, is the one that I have a problem with, amazingly enough, even though I work as an airline pilot, is that number one, you're afraid of heights, which I am.
Right. In air traffic control, the radar room isn't going to be quite as high as the tower, but if you're working as a tower controller, you're probably going to have your feet on the ground a good 100 feet over, if not higher. Fort Myers down here in Florida is over 200 feet. Right, and if you get thunderstorms or wind comes through, the tower will sway just a little bit. Sometimes you don't necessarily notice it until all of a sudden you go to turn and look a different direction, or if you lean against the counter and you feel it push into you. And it can be alarming if you're afraid of heights. I've seen many people turn right back around that came up for a visit and left. So it would be a challenge to get past that part.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, it's funny, people know that I'm a big fan of lighthouses, and it's the same thing. And I love going up to the top of lighthouses, but that's when I figured out my real fear of heights. I mean, I was frozen when I got to the top of the tower. And it's the same thing when I go on tower tours, which I love to do. And if you get a chance, please check it out. But if you're afraid of heights, this might be a tough job for you. And as far as the tower swaying, that kind of scares me a little bit too. In the strong winds, how strong do winds have to be for it to kind of move?
It depends on the facility. At our particular facility, if the winds get around 30 to 35 knots, we'll feel movement in the tower. Wow. We had a water bottle in the tower, and you could actually see the water start to kind of rock back and forth. It's subtle, you don't feel it too bad, but it's definitely there. If you lean against like a counter or a fixed object in the facility, that's when you really notice it. Because as the tower starts to move, you'll feel it push into you or start to lean out from you. So, and if that one little seed gets planted, it's like, boy, it'd be bad if this whole tower fell over. And that's it. If someone's afraid of heights, they're gone.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's funny because in an airplane, we're kind of in control of that airplane. So it's not that fear of heights that you have, especially on a structure like a control tower. Number one, if you are afraid of heights, this may not be the job for you. Number two, and this is the big one, I think, to a lot of people, is that if you don't like high-stress environments, you shouldn't become an air traffic controller.
And that's probably the fact. We talked to that in the last podcast, too, about I find all jobs stressful at certain points. I've been to the supermarket and watched the person trying to ring someone up with 8 people in line, and the 4th person's yelling she's not moving fast enough. Every job's got their deadlines. You got to get the deadline in. If I don't get this performed adequately, then I may not have a job tomorrow. So there's stresses in all environments. But in air traffic control, that stress is more like a first responder stress. I worked as a firefighter for a little while in my past as well, and I feel it's a very similar personality that fits for air traffic control. That would be a police officer, firefighter, someone that's comfortable operating in emergency situations. You can get faced with that at any day. And the other reason it's stressful, and maybe the most stressful for a lot of folks, is you cannot make a mistake. It's a career where, you can't go in and do something wrong and, just be told, oh, you can't do that again. One mistake, one wrong word, wrong turn, one airplane forgotten at a certain position can be fatal for a lot of people. And that's horrific. It will also be a job ender. So you could be employed one day and not employed another day if you make a mistake at that level. So the stress comes in even in slower times because you have to be 100% every day, all the time. You have to be right. You have to follow the rules. Um, and as far as stress goes, lots of jobs have stress. That's where the stress gets added. And some days, it's lighter traffic, it's not as bad. And other days it can be, intense if you have an emergency situation or an accident. So the stress level is a consideration, but that's why it's a respected professional career that is pretty well compensated.
What adds to that stress, and is actually number 3 on our list, is that you shouldn't become an air traffic controller because you don't like being responsible for people's lives, and that is, I think, a big, huge part of that stress.
It absolutely is. And in air traffic control, a lot of people go into training and they learn the book side of it. That's the first part of air traffic control training. You learn the rules, you learn how everything works, you learn separation, and then you go to on-the-job training at a location. And that's where you have to be able to show that you can apply what you've learned in the books to what you're doing on the mic and on the radio. And it's interesting, how different personality types deal with that. Some people can pass every test at 100% with hardly even studying, and they can remember on page 32, paragraph 4, it said should, not shall. And then they get on a radio and they start thinking about the 180 people on this airplane and the 12 people on that airplane and the 6 people on the ground, and they have a harder time applying all that knowledge that they've learned. There's other people that have to work real hard to memorize the little intricate rules, and there is a lot. When it comes to learning air traffic control, it's a fast-paced learning environment, and the reason is because if you can't learn at that fast pace, your chances of succeeding in the field are going to be a lot less. So it's a fast-paced learning environment, but there's people that struggle with that pace, and then they get out in the field, and when it comes to actual stress situations, I mean, I've known some controllers who'd have 8 airplanes on frequency. One guy was smoking in the cockpit, another guy had a flat tire on the runway, he's changing runways, and you wouldn't know his conversation was any different than what you and I are doing right now. And those guys are difficult to work with as a controller because you got to pay attention to what's actually being said to really know what's going on the other side of the room sometimes. But that is probably one of the hardest parts as far as the stress level goes is being able to apply that knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really, and applying that knowledge because you're keeping people safe and making sure that, every day you come to work, you realize that, this is a really, really important job. I do that in my job. If I ever think about doing something that might be risky, I just turn around and look behind me at those 200 people sitting behind me.
Absolutely.
And that's where, you need to know that you are responsible for people's lives. And I think you do realize that every time you go out there as an air traffic controller. So now the number 4, and you kind of hinted on this before, reason that you should not become an air traffic controller is that it can be very exhausting intellectually.
It is, and that's one of the things that it's hard to explain. Physically, a physical job, you get it. If people are out there digging a ditch or laying sod or planting trees and doing tree work, I mean, that's hard physical labor. They're worn out at the end of the day. And I have people look at me, it's like, you've been sitting on your butt all day in a beautiful tower with air conditioning. Why are you tired? But the fact is, believe it or not, the brain actually takes a lot of energy to work. And the mental stimulation you go under on an average day of work can, on some days, be very, very heavy. I finished a day of work and got down to my car and literally just sat there in the quiet for about 5 minutes before I started to drive because I was trying to figure out what my name was again. And it can be exhausting. I get home from a day of busy air traffic sometimes, and it literally feels like I ran a marathon. And it's not just me. I've talked to many of my controller friends, and we laugh at each other about it sometimes. It's like, man, it's exhausting sitting here, isn't it? And but it is. It can be. It can be a job like any other job, but I hate to always be negative on that because it's also very rewarding, as we discussed in the last podcast. So.
Absolutely. And that's something that can happen that, can bring that home. Like you said, sometimes you have to decompress before you head home, especially because it can be so challenging and exhausting. Great term, exhausting intellectually. The other part of the job that a lot of people want to go to work and know when they're going to work every day. That number 5, it's rarely a 9 to 5.
Correct. Air traffic is almost always shift work, and it's a 365-day a year, and in many facilities, 24 hours a day. So starting off in air traffic control, you're probably not going to get as good of hours and shifts as the guy that's been at that facility for 18 years. So you can expect mid shifts at facilities that are open at midnight. Uh, Most of the contract towers side of it, where I'm at, we don't have very many 24-hour facilities, so that's an added benefit. It's everything is give and take. At a smaller facility, the pay scale might not be the same as it is at a large facility, but the hours at a large facility may be different. And at facilities that become critically short-staffed, as we've seen on the news, you could be stuck working 6-10-hour shifts occasionally. Some places for an extended period of time. And although that's well compensated, you're giving up a very large portion of your life, to that at that time. So it's an amount of dedication, without a doubt. And at every facility, the requirements are going to be different, but no doubt it's a consideration.
So when just to add some color to that, is that based on seniority, what shifts you get?
Normally, absolutely. The longer you're at a facility, when the schedules are made, you get to choose what days off, depending on how the schedule and the facility is set up. You might get to choose whether you're working days, nights. Many times at most facilities, it's a rotation. And that's both good and bad. But the good part is, you go in the afternoon for your first, couple shifts. You work through the middle day for a shift or two in the middle, and then you work a couple morning shifts. But when you get off Friday, it's usually early, early afternoon. You have the rest of that day off. You have your 2 days off, and then you don't have to go in until the afternoon following that. And that's how most facilities will operate, is on a rotating shift schedule. But, most facilities, especially as you become more senior, you can usually get a shift or days off that are more tailored to what you want to work.
Well, that's some good color, and also shows you this truly isn't a 9 to 5 job, that's for sure. So if you like 9 to 5 jobs, this might not be the job for you. Also, this may not be the job for you, being an air traffic controller, if number 6, you're afraid to make mistakes, but it's also because you can't make any mistakes, can you?
No, and that's the hardest part of the job. And if you're afraid of failure and afraid of mistakes, the problem isn't like a personality issue so much as it will hinder your way of being able to solve the problems. If you're constantly second guessing yourself or constantly worried about what's coming out of your mouth or what's going to be said, you're either going to miss a transmission that you might not needed to miss, or you'll start falling behind when all of a sudden those 6 airplanes turn into 8 airplanes, turn into 10 airplanes, and you're still trying to work out what's going on with the 5th airplane. You have to be able to make a decision. It has to be right, and you have to be able to move forward. And it's not to say that every decision we always make is right. If we err as air traffic controllers, you're always going to err on the side of safety. I've had guys in the downwind that I've extended downwind to follow traffic on final, and dealing with a departure or dealing with another spacing issue further out. And next thing I know, look up and I'm thinking, boy, I wish I just hooked him in and made him number 1. Sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong. If I'm wrong, I'm going to err on the side of safety, which is, good for them until they call me on the phone and yell at me for making him number 2. But but it all works out. But you absolutely can't be afraid to make that decision. It's got to be, the right decision. You have to be able to change your mind on the fly. You have to be able to maneuver. A situation might start off, one way, and then all it takes is one emergency, one different turn, one change in runway configuration, a wind shift, and now you got to recompute your whole entire plan to compensate for whatever has changed. So the decision making is definitely important.
That kind of leads us to our next thing, is that if you're someone who likes routine and things not changing all the time, well, this wouldn't be the job for you, because number 7 reason you shouldn't become an air traffic controller is because it's not routine. It's always changing. If you don't like that, this may not be the job for you.
No, absolutely not. And I get teased by all my friends here at work that I'm like the OCD controller guy. And I get in, I usually have my strips in a certain spot and my pens and everything, right where I want. I got the microphone to keep a clean environment around me. Other guys, you can stack stuff all over the place and it doesn't phase them. They don't care. But if you really like structure and you're relying on structure, this probably isn't going to be the easiest career field because as much as I like to have things kind of in order, to keep things balanced, you can have everything set up for one runway and in an instant have to change to a totally different runway. So all your plans, all your structure, everything that looked all neat and tidy and seemed to make sense 1 minute can 5 minutes later with a wind shift be completely different. Number two guy could be number eight guy because now he's got to go to the other runway. So if you want to do the same thing every single day just because it's comfortable, this is probably not going to be that career.
One other thing that's constantly changing is the fact that rules change. There's new technologies.
Absolutely.
There's insight into performing differently, and also being safer, and new technologies out there that we have to learn. And that's another reason that you may not want to do this as becoming an air traffic controller. Is number 8 is ongoing training and refresher training, and some are required, I think, monthly. Correct?
That is correct. There's monthly recurrent training that goes on. There's annual training for different areas of what we do. There's consistent changes to notices, to procedures, letters of agreement. It's a ever-changing environment that we're in, and you're always learning. It's a lot like the medical field, where nurses and doctors, have to do recurrent training to stay current on changes in their field. It's a professional career, and that was one of our positives in the last podcast. But when you have a professional career like that has intensive requirements, those requirements change, and we learn. Sometimes when a bad thing happens, we find ways to protect thousands of people in the future from ever suffering that same bad outcome. So we might have to change the way a procedure is taken. Just in the DC incident that happened not too long ago, we've already heard that they're no longer supplying that helicopter route. They found by changing the helicopter route, they can alleviate that potential risk. So that's just a typical example of how things can change, how it can operate one way, this week, and then a week later, that operation might change, and that requires training. If you were trained that you could fly the helicopters up the river to set up an approach, and now you can't, you have to retrain a different way to get those aircraft to where they need to be. And the same thing with rules. As rules change, technology changes, as you mentioned. All those things make a huge difference, and it's a constant learning environment.
Yeah, someone once told me the one constant in aviation that it's always changing. And that's where this is going to happen throughout your career. You're going to have to go through training. As a matter of fact, if you take some time off, there's a lot of training going to have to be done because things change so dramatically, and it's just amazing just how much is changing. And that's a cool thing. One of the positives, if you like change, that's for sure. But if you don't like ongoing training and refresher training on a monthly basis, even, this may not be the career for you. The other part of this career that I think is a big deal for people with families, and the number 9 reason this may not be the career for you as an air traffic controller, is you may have to move for this career, won't you?
Well, and that's the truth. Air traffic control facilities aren't in every single small town on every state and everywhere. States like Minnesota, where the population is more spread out, there might only be 4 or 5 facilities. You get a place like Florida where there's a lot of facilities. You might be able to get closer. And, when we had mentioned when you first, step into the career, it's a lot like being a pilot. Sometimes your very first job location may not be where you want to end up permanently. But, to get that career started, to get those hours, to get, that equipment under your belt, same as air traffic control, sometimes you have to take a job, might not be exactly where you want, and develop those skills, develop seniority, and then, get a transfer and work your way back towards, as openings happen, closer to where you want to be. But it's likely that the very first job location or your very first career might not be in your backyard. So you might have to relocate to get this career going.
Yeah, and that was actually some color that was given to me by our co-hosts on our sister podcast, Stuck My Gavcast. Two of our co-hosts who are former air traffic controllers, and that was one of the things they mentioned is that you'd have to move, and it just you're not going to be able to pick the specific town that you want to work in. It's a lot easier in other fields where you can commute to work, where you have to be there, on a daily basis. It's going to be hard to kind of commute very far, so you may have to move for that career, and that's the number 9 reason you may not want to become a air traffic controller. The other part of this, and we're going to talk a little bit with somebody later on, as far as reasons you wouldn't want to get into this field, is that it's very difficult to get into. And we are going to have a guest on the show that's going to talk a little bit about that, and they're doing some great things. And I think George may even plug them also. But it is truly difficult to get into this job, and that's our number 10 reasons why you might not want to become an air traffic controller.
It is. It's a challenge. I had just looked at statistics a couple weeks ago, talking with a friend of mine, and they had, I believe it was over 20,000 applicants for the FAA last year, and they hired either 1,300 or 1,600. So you can imagine, at that percentage rate, I mean, you're at the 7 or 8% of the people that applied to get the job, and out of that 7 or 8% that got picked up. There's a large portion of those that are going to find the coursework and the challenging, and then when they get out to the field, the rate of attrition, they're not going to get 13 or 1,600 controllers out of that bunch. So it is a challenging field to get into, and there's more and more opportunities out there to get that career started. And I'm glad you're going to have, I believe we're talking about ATCFO in the future,
Right.
because it's an outstanding, way to start for a lot of people. If they're only going to be hiring, 7 or 8% of the applicants, well, imagine how great your application will look when you're already a certified air traffic controller and they know they can put you right to work. Programs like that give you a huge advantage, not to mention open up the opportunity to work in the federal contract tower system, which is almost always hiring and nationwide. It's a difficult career to get into, but it's worth the effort. It is well worth the effort.
George, we talked about all these challenges and reasons you may not want to become an air traffic controller, but I'm sure there's a lot of people that look at these and say, that doesn't bother me, any of those. So this might be the perfect career for them. And you found that it's a great career for you, and it's been very rewarding and enjoyable. How many years have you been doing this? I forgot to ask you that.
Oh, now you're going to date me, are you? I started in the Navy in June of 91, and I started my air traffic control work in February of 92.
Wow.
I've been working VFR towers in the federal contract tower system since September of 1997. So, it's been a few years.
Yeah.
And it's been a steady climb. There's not a lot of hierarchy as far as air traffic control. There's not a whole lot of difference between the person that started last week and the guy that's been there for 27 years. We're still talking to airplanes. We're still separating airplanes. The difference might be in your choice of schedule, as we talked about earlier. But it has been a very rewarding career. I like something different every day. It's financially, it's a very good career to have. It is a source of pride, for me. It's nice when someone, asks what your job is. You don't go for, you feel good about it. And it's just part of the whole picture. And although it's challenging and you have your good days, you have your bad days, like a lot of other careers, it is a field of profession that will not let you down.
And it's something very important. It keeps us safe, pilots and also the people on the ground and the passengers, and we really appreciate that. And if you're thinking about becoming an air traffic controller, like I said, go back to our last episode, listen to all the other things we've done with George, especially that video that we discussed what it's like to be an air traffic controller, because that was absolutely outstanding. And George, hopefully we'll have you back on again to maybe even get a little more color as to doing the actual job of being an air traffic controller.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And George, I can't wait because the crew's gonna be down there in November at Punta Gorda. There's the Florida International Air Show. Of course, we do the podcast for them on the Stuck My Gavcast, our sister podcast. So go down there and check it out. It's in November if you want to see the crew. Also, we talked about getting into air traffic control. One other resource that we have, there are some scholarships for air traffic control, and you can find them in our scholarships guide. Go to aviationcareerspodcast.com/scholarships, and you can actually get one of those for free by using the coupon code PAYITFORWARD. But really the most important thing is, we've talked about in the past, is if you're thinking about doing this as a career, is do your research. Talk to people, listen to George, and if you have questions, feedback at aviationcareerspodcast.com. We definitely will forward them on to George. Well, George, thanks for your service, and also thanks so much for keeping us safe and also coming on and telling us the reasons we should and should not become an air traffic controller.
Oh, thanks for having me, Carl. It's always fun.
Well, like I said, if you can, do me a favor, go out there after we're done with this. Don't stop. Take one step today to move forward in your career and in your life. And you know what? You'll get there quicker than you think. Well, safe flying out there. We'll talk to you next episode.